We're going to get started now. Thanks everyone for coming. This is the first of a series of talks called VERGE Talks. And it's highlighting emerging architects in Australia, the conversations around that as well. So this talk is focused on the development of Australian architecture, and these open forums bring to light good design in Australia with these emerging architects. I've been quite strict. I've given the speakers 35 minutes to speak, which is not a lot of time, but that allows us to have some discussions and questions after. So in person, you'll have to come up and take the mic. And if you're online, there's a Q&A feature which you can use. So without further ado, Simulaa is a Naarm-based architectural practice founded by architects Bonnice and AA Jankovic. The work of the practice is designed by a considered and research-driven approach that prioritizes time-based and ecological design thinking. Andre and Anna both serve as lecturers in architecture, teaching and undertaking research at the University of Melbourne and RMIT University, respectively. Simulaa's projects have been recognized for their contributions to architectural discourse and research, co-curating and designing the Deep Time Real-Time exhibition at the Design Hub Gallery, presenting design standards as a part of the National Gallery of Victoria's Melbourne Now exhibition, and exhibiting Easey Factory in the Retrofit exhibition at the Design Gallery Melbourne. The practice received the inaugural Alastair Swayn grant for the project's Notes from a Finite World. Simulaa's projects range across scales and modes from buildings to exhibitions, publications and speculative research, exploring architecture's role within the environmental limits, circular systems and material cultures. So Anna and Andre, over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you.
So also, I do remember the requirement for us to talk about one other influential Australian architect on our practice. Is that still a thing? No, he's gone. Okay. All right. So
yes, it is.
Yes, that's good. That's good. Because that'll take up at least 15 minutes.
Yeah. But yes, thank you, Lucas, for the invitation to present. It's really nice to have the opportunity to connect from afar despite the distance. And yeah, we're going to present this short talk on our practice under the title of It Yields and Won't Last. And yes, we're going to touch on another Australian influential practice for us and a project that's influenced our work.
Lucas gave a pretty good intro. But so we will just focus on a couple of projects today. A couple from here in Melbourne, and then one that we attempted over in Basel, which is a little closer to you. So that'll be a bit of what we talk about. I mean, the other important aspect to our practice is our sort of academic roles. So we sort of split our time 50-50. Anna at RMIT, me at Melbourne University. And there's a particular focus of the studios that we run, energy related, also working a lot with the agricultural campus at the University of Melbourne, looking at growing materials, bio-based materials, and that sort of thing. So that's always, important part of the way we work and the way we practice as well.
Maybe just a brief slide. This is where we are in this vast country. We are situated in the south, at the bottom of the state of Victoria. And as Lucas said, we say that we're a Naarm-based practice, Naarm being the word for place, referring to the lands of the Kulin nations, the people of the Woiwurrung and Bunurong language groups, whose unceded lands we are presenting from. And this map represents, I guess, the map of the Indigenous language groups of the nations of First Peoples of Australia across the country.
Yeah, we're still obviously trying to reckon with like a very dark colonial past with a long, proud Indigenous history. And I mean, just for context, like the name Melbourne, that was named after a former British Prime Minister of England who never visited Australia by the then Queen of England, who also never visited Australia. So it doesn't feel as an appropriate a name. Okay, so we we're going to talk about a particular architect, Michael Markham, through a couple of his different modes, which was field consultants in the 90s with Peter Brew, and then the Urban Green Tub Workshop. I would say, not even a very well-known architect, shamefully for us, in Australia or even Melbourne, but one that we think is incredibly exceptional and has had a big impact on our practice. Well, there's a lot to talk about with his work. We're only going to kind of cover one project in particular.
In brief.
And it's our interpretation of that. And so I'm sure he would probably have disagreements with certain things that we'll say. So hopefully this is not recorded.
Yeah. But this is the plans of two of his office's projects that we also sort of see as these bookends. The Holyoke Cottage, which was his own house, completed in 2000 on the left, and the Batenga House completed in 2012. And these are also how Michael phrases it himself, the sort of two representative of two styles, which is also, I guess, distinguishing, the two offices that he's had, field consultants with Peter Brew, as Andre mentioned, which ended in 2003, and Tug Workshop, his current office, which he collaborates with Tim Hall a lot, an engineer. So I think that's also important to mention as well. Extremes. This is, whilst you may be aware that Australia is the driest inhabited continent on Earth, 70% of the country is sort of classified as arid or semi-arid, particularly in the red centre of the continent. But what isn't well known is what this map represents, which is the sort of temperature fluctuations that the country can experience in one day. And where we are in the south, pretty much the whole state of Victoria experiences 10 to 12 degrees of temperature fluctuation in one day, which is quite extreme. So it's that condition and that particular, part of our context that Michael definitely refers or responds to through his work and also in this project that we're going to talk about. And
it sort of reflects the fact that you just can't design the same way in our part of Australia as you can to the north.
Yeah.
And it is pretty unusual to have the very hot and the very cold all in one day, which is particular. Which brings us to like a very particular part of Michael's research, which is through his research into spacesuits and space shuttles, sort of likening the extremes that this sort of space exploration has to deal with to be similar to that condition of our kind of part of the continent. And
so this sort of research and investigation into the spacesuit and the space shuttle as having to contend with those same extreme conditions, moving in and out of atmospheres from extreme heat to extreme cold. So this does inform his work a lot.
And this is, I think, it's affected both styles, as we'll call them, in different ways. And I think the first style was very much about the kind of lightweight, cheap, available materials. And then in the second style, more the spacesuit, where it's a highly conditioned space that's sort of like locked off from the outside world.
This is just quickly to say, I guess it's a very small project. It's a house, a cottage on a very small sort of inner suburban lot, which was awarded the highest Medal of Honour, the Victorian Architecture Medal, as well as the Harold Desborough Anneal Award for residential architecture in 2000. He describes the cottage as a modern cottage in an area of 19th century cottages and a rethinking of the small lot house. So it contested and it also inverts really the kind of archetypal colonial cottage pictured here on the left. A homestead that sits centre on the lot with a front and a back, a perimeter veranda shading the building's facade and sort of directing views outwards to the landscape, surrounded by a garden and bounded by a fence. So we'll take you through a little bit of this project and uncover some of those qualities as to why.
Yeah, and then a deliberate inversion on that sort of colonial cottage. So, yeah, the cottage itself is sort of dominated by a circular internal courtyard, open to the elements, containing a sole mulberry tree. This courtyard is the lung of the home, breathing air, sunshine, and space into the heart of the house. From here, both energy and life filter and disperse to the extremities of the interior. Spatially, the courtyard is perceived as integral to the open planning, where the absence of a roof creates a horizontal window.
And maybe just to go back, I mean, as the architect describes, it doesn't have 3 bedrooms. It doesn't have a bathroom for every bedroom. The garden is in it, not around it, as Andre's just described, and there's a few other qualities which we'll talk about it questioning. These are...
It sits in a bit of a lineage, but...
Yeah, a couple of formative precedents. Certainly one on the left, which many people locally will know, the Grounds House by the architect Sir Roy Grounds. Of course, this was his own house, which also won the Victorian Architecture Medal in 1954, so 46 years earlier. However, the courtyard in the Holyoke Cottage is not this sort of pure geometry as it's shown in Grounds' plan. It's irregular, it's off axis, it's sort of giving way to other episodic forces in the plan. So perhaps instead echoing some of Villa Snellman.
Another particular thing to this house, and we actually had an exhibition that we ran in our gallery that we run in the front of our office, and it was 3 houses from the 1990s, and they were all distinguished by having one common trait, which was one bathroom. That might sound fairly typical to most of you in Europe, but that is fairly unusual, sadly, here, where often every bedroom has a sort of bathroom attached to it. So quite distinctively, this project is decidedly one bedroom for a whole family.
Yeah.
One bathroom. The other thing is the kind of non-static nature of the plan, that there's a sort of looseness, that there aren't necessarily, there's a less amount of fixed walls and certain ways that the space can be transfigured through the small manipulation of a door or a sliding door to create a new sort of partition.
Yeah. A 4-wheel drive cannot fit in the garage. It's a very sort of distinct, it is a small lot. I mean, so much of, I think, the kind of vehicular-driven design of houses, particularly in Australia and really of our urban condition, can be sort of evident in domestic space. But this one is obviously very compact. It's literally described as a cupboard of a car. And probably this car is, also, it should be said, well chosen because, Michael really refers to it as a sort of technological antecedent. He sort of speaks a lot about first principles, thinking through design.
And invention. And that car exemplifies a particular invention. And he sort of likes to think of, question whether architecture can still invent. And so this is in a context of very large houses. So, this house is a third of the size of the average Australian home.
Which is here.
Yeah, which is this beautiful thing. And there's just one thing we just wanted to read it out with this particular thing. It's the front and the back elevations. And the one on the left is a very particular moment in the project. So the one on the right is the street-facing elevation. And Michael writes, the facade is at the rear and faces a storm drain in preference to the street. Here is the possibility of another city, inflected by now almost buried topographic features, watercourses, bad ground, sacred sites, and animals and plant habitats. In the 1920s, Walter Burley Griffin had pointed to the ghost of nature in the Australian city. And that a lot comes down to this very particular moment in the project where this existing tree is sort of, the architecture yields to the tree. So even within this small footprint, it's, further constrained through allowing that tree to kind of exist as it did. And so this sort of cut into the rear facade affects the interior planning as well.
Mm. And this, idea of yielding to other non-human, non-built things, is an important one for us, I think, which we can sort of similarly recognise in this excellent work by Jensen and Skodven in Norway. Again, where sort of, everything is sort of carefully situated around a sort of established ecosystem, so not to sort of disturb it and to, either yield to it or work with it.
Another kind of really particular feature, which is quite surprising, is there's a sort of low profile created by the flat roof at the top, and it's detailed in a way to contain around 50 mils of water. And this is a kind of passive thermal system. So the idea is that it kind of cools the house as things evaporate, but also reflects the sun. So it was a sort of like low tech way to kind of cool the property. Interestingly, though, when one of the reviewers came to review the house, he described it as like a billabong filled with like birds and insects. So it had taken on a kind of otherworldly kind of
a natural form of figure,
which you can also see here. And I think that's sort of where we launch off from. I mean, there's much more we could sort of say about Michael Marker's practice, but we'll have to leave it there.
But that does take us and lead us into one of our own projects, the House for Lichen. It was a project that began when we were walking an old mining trail in Victoria's northwest, near the towns of Chewton and Castlemaine. And these archival photographs sort of give you a bit of an idea of the Garfield mine, particularly at Chewton, which began operations in 1860s during Victoria's gold rush era, extracting quartz reef gold from these deep underground shafts, these like old chasms in the landscape. And by the 1880s, it had expanded to include like a large crushing battery powered by a water wheel, one of the biggest of its kind in Australia. And then operations kind of dwindled in the 1900s when the wheel ceased running and the site was thereafter abandoned.
And this was a very particular condition to Australia, where we dig things up and then we sell them for the most part. And the sort of, at times, ecological devastation that can kind of ensue.
Yeah, it's sometimes hard to think that a landscape can recover from this type of upheaval. But in the space of 120 years, the eroded gullies, tailings, and the exposed rocks left by the mining, have slowly covered over under the natural regrowth of plant life, regenerated grasses and these woodlands, which you see here.
And I think for us, what was like quite striking as we were sort of walking through this landscape was like a rich array of lichen and mosses growing across the upturned stone and the ruins of the old miners' dwellings. So you can see the sort of foundations and semi-ruinous structures there. And so, our interest sort of was triggered there in lichens. And, lichens are sort of like natural environmental sensors, acting as, excellent bioindicators of air quality and environmental health. In a healthy or clean environment, you'll find a wide variety of lichen.
And yeah, like that's the particularly interesting thing, how you can kind of observe this, condition, this signifying rejuvenation quite clearly, and this sort of symbiosis at play, which, when lichen are present. But there's, the Gaia hypothesis, as it's known, developed by Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock, sort of described the Earth as this sort of self-regulating system in which living and non-living matter co-produce the conditions of survival. From animals and insects to plants and bacteria and oceans and atmosphere, the Earth is this system of mutual exchange between living beings and their environment. So that concept of interdependency being, I think, super critical here.
And it was returning to the city that we kind of like noticed the absence of any lichen. Like it was something we didn't really think much about, and then we realized we couldn't find anywhere. And so, like lichens don't have a kind of a buffer. They basically reflect their environment. So because of the heat, the toxic runoff, pollution, dryness of the kind of hard urban environment, you won't find lichen much at all. But we did sort of stumble across like one particular part of the city where lichen was sort of established, and that was around the exhibition gardens. And so the bluestone there, it sort of bluestone retaining wall, it sort of provide a kind of sanctuary for the lichen, and the garden itself was able to kind of buffer and mediate the kind of conditions of the city.
Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so I mean, then as a sort of side, we've been doing a lot of work with the City of Melbourne Depot, which is essentially just this kind of like material bank of everything that the city is sort of made of, from in terms of street infrastructure, kind of cycles through this site, and most of the curbs and the streets in Melbourne are made of bluestone and basalt, and there was like a rich array of bluestone boulders and blocks there in the depot.
And yeah, I mean, basalt, it's a local stone. It's mined from the newer volcanic province of Western Victoria, which is where we were. And, the vast basalt plains were created by lava flows, dating back several million years, which like blanketed much of the western section of Victoria, which you can kind of see in the sort of mid blue color. And now that area, these plains like produced the magnesium and iron-rich soils, which now our agricultural industry relies on. So it's quite sort of interesting to sort of think about the like layers of time that this region has sort of uncovered.
So that sort of set up the foundation of the project. And we saw the house itself as a sort of rudimentary bothy, recalling proto-architectural forms like dolmens, megalithic structures built primarily as tombs or burial chambers, dating back to the Neolithic period.
Or a bluestone cottage, perhaps. But lichen grow at a glacial pace. They typically grow 0.1 to 15 millimeters per year, depending on the environmental conditions, obviously. They also, over long periods, but, think 50 to over 1,000 years, can visibly etch and pit rock surfaces through a combination of physical and chemical processes. And this gradual breakdown contributes to the first stage of soil formation and this sort of process of like ecological succession and renewal.
So we sort of just developed then this sort of like narrative around how we could kind of facilitate the lichen. And so, set up on the structure as an environmental sensor that logs temperature, pollution, humidity, and air quality to sort of monitor the conditions relative to lichen growth. And this sort of is then connected to a mister, which moisture is a very important kind of aspect for the lichen to be kind of cultivated.
And I guess the house itself, becomes this kind of symbolic, is symbolic of this kind of long view, this deep time view, where lichen growth registers environmental history, accumulation over seasons and decades, this evolution of the structure, as it were. And over centuries, they perform the sort of quiet geological work of breakdown and renewal. And like through deep time, then the structure, is sort of proposed to gradually be reclaimed and I guess folded back into the landscape, which it once observed. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're getting close to realizing that one.
Yeah.
So the next little project we're just going to talk about is just an exhibition we completed earlier in the year called Deep Time, Real Time, which also includes a installation strategy.
And the exhibition was supported by the Alastair Swayn Foundation, which Lucas mentioned. We co-curated the exhibition with Fleur Watson, but yes, completed the exhibition design itself and contributed to this installation. So we might talk about the architecture, particularly a little bit more in this work.
Yeah, there is
rather than the broader concepts, but there is another lecture which you can go find, elsewhere where we sort of deep dive into that if you're interested.
So we'll skim over it. We're also mindful there's 10 minutes left.
Yeah, we're running out of time. Yeah. But in brief, the exhibition explored this concept of time literacy as a way of thinking about architecture and design. We conducted an interview with Professor Michael Sean Fletcher of the Palynology, Paleoecology and Biogeography Research Lab here at the University of Melbourne, where he says there are deep time rhythms that occur over millions of years and frequencies within which the world operates, day and night. Our understanding of where we are now is dependent on knowing the journey we've been on and where we're heading. If we fail to appreciate the underpinning factors that support the world we live in, then we are blind to understanding how to live on the earth sustainably. So this really, summarised the motivations underpinning the exhibition, in quick summary. But it's through these dual lenses of deep time and real time. The exhibition sort of considers how our understanding of temporal scales influences our capacity in whatever field we might operate to contend with these contemporary ecological and technological challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was split, as Anna mentioned, across like curation, exhibition design on the left, so of the whole space. So this is the Design Hub Gallery, which was designed by Swayn, who's a fairly well-known Australian architect. Hopefully someone talks about him as well. And then on the right was Strata Signals, which was our particular installation as well. And so some of the works, this is the work of Nick Mangan on the left and Fazan Lotfijam on the right. So it's sat between these temporal timescales of like real time and deep time. Again, if you want to know more, there's the deep reveal on YouTube. And then this is Strata Signals, which is essentially a geological timeline, along with other research and interactive works.
Yeah. And it was housing a lot of like geological core samples, which are all collected and collated. And, I think it's now close to a 200-year-old repository of geological samples that the Geological Survey of Victoria hold. Here you can sort of see part of their very vast warehouse that sort of catalogues everything. And, it is obviously, it's like a scientific hub. Whilst, it's primarily used for sort of, prospecting, like geological surveying for, commercial exploration. There's a whole, scientific field that engages with this as well. And it really, the idea of, I guess, representing Victoria's sort of geomorphology in this timeline was the kind of briefs that we went to them with. And the geologists there, who kind of called themselves the rock librarians, were like super keen to, put, I guess, the most intriguing formations of geology on show in the exhibition.
And this was the first time that the drill cores had ever been put on public display.
Yeah.
So most people don't even know this resource exists. And obviously it's contentious, like it's about extractivism, it's country, it's like there's a lot like in it, but we saw it as like an exciting opportunity to kind of treat this as a public resource and allow the public to kind of interact with it. So a really important part was the kind of olfactory experience. Like you could literally spray and touch these drill cores.
And smell that kind of, I think there's a word for it, like petrichor, this really sort of distinct smell. Like you can sort of, it's like what you smell when it rains and you're walking the street. It's like, it's meant to be for some reason something that's really ingrained in us, in our DNA. But no one quite knows how that sense works with rocks. But yeah, it was about immersion and interactivity, and keep going. And as Andre said, it's sort of, we describe it often as this kind of armature that's also housing and representing a lot of other disciplinary fields that explore these, same conditions, but, through different either technological means or, at different temporal scales, and it sort of layers up the structure.
Yeah, it's a sort of strata. And the billboards at the top, you can kind of see there are kind of recent aerial imagery, that drone footage that we took of the sites where these drill cores were taken from. So you could see the sort of transformation of that land over that amount of time. Along the wall as well was like a timeline that was sort of tying in together all the different works in their relative timescales.
And sort of codifying in the same manner that, Geological Survey would, codifying and logging all the data that's like telling you where the rocks are coming from, not only the date of that sort of geology, but also the date that they've been excavated, etc. And then other video works. So we made a sort of documentary of the work of the Palynology, Paleoecology and Biogeography Research Lab, and had other sort of representations of, in this instance, the iNaturalist database, particularly across the state of Victoria and other parts of Australia, where citizen scientists are sort of contributing live in real time to this to this database that everyone can sort of start to catalogue.
Hyperspectral imagery. So this is Hypersense lab that we work with at University of Melbourne again. And this is again about like recasting particularly technology that had sort of nefarious origins in the service of sort of ecological good. So in this case, the hyperspectral imagery is able to reveal soil health, soil condition,
vegetation,
and land practices.
Yeah. And then, much like House for Lichen, there's an environmental sensor that's sort of monitoring the, gallery's environment
in real time.
And feeding back.
So there was a series of screens that were displaying the data that was being captured within the installation to sort of monitor different levels of carbon dioxide, other pollution, temperature.
Yeah. And this is pretty much just say, there is this kind of rock cycle, this sort of constantly moving system, which, to us is, quite static, unless of course you're in a sort of, an earthquake-prone region. There's very little that sort of has us in tune with these kind of cyclical systems. And, we often describe this through the words of geologist Marcia Bornerwood, who describes the Earth as this closed-loop regenerative system, kind of constantly reforging and restocking these different
4.5 billion year old.
4.5 billion over 4.5 billion years. Yeah, it's pretty vast and hard to fathom, really. So it's always about trying to work through these timescales conceptually and representationally to sort of have us start to engage with some of those long, deep time views. But this was in the design hub.
Yeah, it extends to the sort of material paradigm of the exhibition itself and the installation. So most of you wouldn't be familiar with this building, but it is completely clad interior ceilings with this web forged material, which is essentially like plant deck. Often gets used as plant decks. So it was kind of a novel way to use the material, but we kind of realized that you could lift it off the walls. So that was a really kind of key part to the kind of initial concept, was to kind of, and we had to be resourceful within the constraints that we had.
But we're sort of literally stealing from the building, repurposing, adapting what we sort of had. We didn't really want to use a lot of materials and then only for them to sort of be discarded. So everything's kind of, strapped, bolted, temporarily fixed. It's all designed for disassembly and sort of an adaptation later on. But the web forge then becomes this sort of plinth, these panels which you see, that the absence of them from the core of the building then become this plinth for the timeline.
So there was a nice relationship set up between those two spaces with the absence and then the timeline. So then, as Anna said, more broadly, the design of the exhibition itself is just all around that, a way to kind of like clip, bolt, strap together, and to sort of be able to, deconstruct it and also like hack the structure itself. So it was changed, it was adapted as it was needed. We ran like probably too many events and programs across the duration of the exhibition, which was exhausting. But and then the structure kind of had to facilitate different things at different times, which was fun as well.
And the panels you see are all these compressed hemp board panels, which sadly the manufacturers are not making them anymore. I'm sure someone else will, but the idea is that all the parts which can't be used can just be sort of decomposed as well.
So we'll fly through this last one, but this is obviously just something a little closer to Zurich, which is the competition that we were unsuccessful in. So I think from the outset, I think we were kind of like just quite, we came in kind of not knowing a great deal about the kind of context of this situation, but I think...
And we certainly weren't familiar with, that catastrophic event at Schweizerhalle, the fire that happened in 1986.
Yeah, so the Schweizerhalle fire, to us was just like such a profound thing. Like it was so devastating. I think what it really made us like acutely aware of is that national borders or state borders mean nothing. There's ecological devastation. because everything through the entire Rhine, all through all the countries, was sort of devastated. And so that idea that bioregions need to be kind of like more considered when sort of making these sort of decisions about policy and environmental practices.
We don't have the tools or the mechanisms within states to deal with something of this magnitude.
But then we were also like in admiration for the way that Switzerland had sort of approached the disaster and sort of the reckoning it went under to sort of tackle its broader legacy of toxic materials. And so, as we understand it from afar, there'd be sort of the government has really mapped out like 38,000 polluted sites across the country requiring rehabilitation.
Mm.
So our project kind of wanted to facilitate that, but that kind of work. And we saw it seeing as the more dedicated to minor toxic events. So these are the things that say like and recognize that perhaps don't have the same visible devastation.
Yeah.
So this is like, PFAS materials, forever chemicals, microplastics, runoff pollutants from cars. And so the idea was to transform this car park in the service of studying and recording and mapping and sensing minor toxicity.
Yeah, a kind of living laboratory. And in late 2023, as part of the Notes from a Finite World research project that we received that grant for, which Lucas mentioned also, we were sort of visiting a lot of, sites and projects which, really presented new paradigms for architecture, we felt, and the Hamburg Energy Bunker was one of those. And so we kind of started to rethink this car park through that sort of same lens, this recasting of an existing structure.
So then it became this kind of like systems diagram, which we often start with, just about like the interrelational qualities between the different components. So there's a series of different interventions which either have forms of exchange of energy or water or filtration or monitoring. And we'll just quickly fly through a couple of them examples. So in this instance, it's a setup between a gravity battery and a solar array. So the gravity battery is able to lift. In this instance, we had large basalt boulders. Is able to lift like heavy stone when there's a surplus of energy, and then once the sun goes down, the heavy weight slowly drops and then spins a generator. So that allows you to get electricity at night as well.
Yep.
There was, in much the same way as the Hamburg Energy Bunker, has a sort of water battery. So a big kind of water tank that's heated and that energy retained. We were proposing to use the existing kind of silo on the car park as well. The basement, again, took a series of smaller scale water batteries, which more directly translate into electricity. And also looking at the roof as like ways to sort of plant that and have natural filtration of water and toxicity from, water runoffs and rain. And then a sort of like this new armature that sits on the outside, which was meant to be a kind of like small office dedicated to this work, as a way to kind of help facilitate like exchange, information sessions, and the monitoring itself as a sort of practice.
Yeah, because I think that kind of idea of the living lab is also that there's a in service of regeneration, repair, care, but also like engaging the public. So that's kind of how we sort of saw this one. So I guess we were thinking about the project as a model to replicate. So
we don't know how many of these basins there are, but it seems like it would be. I feel like they don't need to be a car park anymore, surely. But so that we also sort of positioned it as the model that could be applied across context.
We might leave it there though. Thank you so much.
I think we were just starting to warm up too, because it is not nearly 10 o'clock here. So I think that coffee finally kicked in.
Yeah. But welcome any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you both. That was excellent. Any questions?
Yep. Don't be shy.
Come up.
Hi. Thanks for the great talk. I wondered something, and I wrote some notes down for my question. You started with Michael Merkham being inspired by space technology and how he developed a house that battles similar changes, but also like partly with low-tech strategies. And I thought maybe also in your house for Leichen, you the architecture becomes like a petri dish for cultures, but also like through high-tech environmental control. And I wonder, how do you like walk this fine line between high and low tech approaches, and how do you make sure that you're not cutting on technology on one side that you are adding on another side to create a certain biological environment?
Right.
Mhm.
Good question.
It is a good question. I think it's not something that we've figured out, but I think it was certainly something that we kind of tried to think through in the exhibition.
And be conscious of as well.
And be conscious of, because we're certainly not techno-accelerationists, and we understand the limitations and the problematic nature of some technologies, and also that you can't see the unforeseen harm that certain top technologies can kind of cause before they've been sort of fully implemented. So I think that, in the way that we've approached it is we've been really interested. And so like the video that's on the screen now is some geothermal imagery, which is done by the Clean Air Task Force. And we work with them to develop a little video that showcased some of the investigative work that they'd done, which was basically revealing methane polluters. So methane isn't typically visible. And obviously that technology came from military practices. And so a lot of the exhibition sort of tried to grapple with those sort of difficult questions. And that was like, very much looking at, kind of high-tech technology being redeployed in service of something else.
Yeah.
But I think at the same time, in the same way, like in the Holyoke Cottage, the roof is sort of a very lo-fi way to try and mediate the temperature. We kind of, think it's equally important to think both ways and to kind of work out when the best time is to kind of utilize one or the other.
Yeah. And I think it sort of comes back also to this sort of idea of sort of yielding, like, knowing when and how to intervene. It's sort of this really fine line, like architecture is not the answer in every instance, and often needs to then take, this position of yielding to another condition. So I think that relates in sort of how we're sort of evaluating where technology is useful or where it's not. And often sometimes, the lo-fi option is the thing that that works best, really.
Just looking who's online.
Awesome. Got a couple questions online.
Oh, it's in the chat.
Is this a use of X-ray/pseudo night vision renders or Axos? So how do you do your imagery that you do?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Hang on. So renders.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of sometimes, it's like a simulation sometimes of these sort of night vision goggles, these heat-based imaging and mapping. And I think that, some of our earlier projects as well, we're kind of exploring this idea of registering architecture through energy and through heat. So that's sort of where some of that early imagery sort of first played out.
I think it was like, and we've talked about it previously, but I guess it's like questioning forms of architectural representation. Like we have this debate with like colleagues at university, or but we should be concentrating just on plans and just do the plans. But I think we obviously do. That's a fundamental part of the work that we do. But we also feel like that the way that we traditionally represent architecture doesn't describe these interrelational effects that we have, both good and bad.
Yeah, the unseen conditions made visible.
And so the testing through those forms of representation have primarily been like just experimenting ways to like, how can we convey or show things that you can't capture in a kind of static line drawing. So I think, that's where the kind of interest in that is. Again, we haven't like figured it out yet, but I think we just feel like that is an important part of like the way that we want to practice to like explore ways that representation can begin to kind of incorporate some of these concerns.
And maybe, to the second question, I think utopian modular, I mean, it's again sort of not understood as a house per se. If we're sort of talking about, housing many people, maybe the Lichen house is not the house to do that. But I think it's also, there's another discussion that we could have had on that in terms of discussing embodied carbon in architectural materials and this kind of bioregional thinking that we might have. And certainly stone is one of those things with which, we're still mining. It's that, like, that stone basalt is ubiquitous in our city. If you come to our city, you'll read it through the sort of lens of that material. If you go to Sydney, you might see sandstone. Likewise, if you go to Adelaide. So it's sort of, I guess it sort of, it lends itself to those uses, but also, the idea is to use things without breaking them down and.
Yeah, but look, I think it's not trying to solve a bunch of issues. Like, it's essentially more of a kind of speculative project, as a questioning just those symbiotic relationships that architecture can either facilitate or not facilitate.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's not going to solve a housing crisis or do that, and that's not the intention of the project by any means. So I think that's things that we've been doing, trying to do these like straw cassette prefabricated lightweight modular things that can sit above existing commercial strips. So like, the spectrum is wide, which is probably like an issue for the practice because we seem to do very diverse things. But I think the house for lichen is really just to think about that kind of one idea and suspend certain others.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Happy to answer any other question.
Any last questions? No? Awesome. We might leave it there, and mindful students here have lectures to get to. Thank you both. It was a really insightful talk.